Check, check. Check, check. Good evening and welcome to the February 12th, 2020 Planning Board meeting for the Town of Raymond. The Planning Board will come to order. The board does have a quorum. We'll start with roll call.
Mike D'Arcangelo.
Bruce Sanford.
Greg Foster.
Robert O'Neill.
Ed Kranich.
Kevin Woodbury.
This is a public proceeding, and unless the board specifically votes to go into executive session, you have the right to hear everything that is being said and to look at all the exhibits that are presented. Please notify the chair if you are unable to see or hear. The board works from a published agenda and will be considering tonight's items in the following order. We have first a tabled application from the Port Harbor Holdings, and then a public hearing for proposed ordinance changes.
Excuse me, just for the record, you said February 12th, so you might just want to say March 11th.
Thanks.
Just for the record.
Update, it's actually March 11th, 2020. In each instance, the burden is upon the applicant to demonstrate compliance with the provisions of the applicable ordinances or state law. All persons speaking, including representatives of the applicant and members of the public, are asked to stand at the microphone, state their name, address, and affiliation with the application, either for, opposed, or neutral. All persons speaking shall address the chairman. Any conversations must be held in abeyance until after the board has formally adjourned. After the board votes on the merits of each application, it will prepare a written notice of decision. Because of the notice of decision may substantially affect any appeals rights, and also as a matter of courtesy, the board asks that those attending the meeting with regard to a specific application not leave until the board has completed its discussion. Appeals from adverse decision must be filed with the Superior Court or as otherwise provided by law within 45 days of this board's decision. Also, to be certain that you preserve your individual right to file any such appeal, you must be certain that the board's record evidences your appearance this evening in opposition and the basis of your opposition. Actually, our first order of business this evening is the minutes of February 12th.
I move that we approve them as submitted.
Is there a second? Any discussion? All those in favor? All right, that's done. And our next is the old business, the Port Harbor Holdings application. We would first need a motion to remove it from the table.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? All right, the application has been deemed complete at our last meeting and is moved from the table. Before we start the introduction of the project one more time, I know that there was some confusion on the addresses or that went out as notifications. So we're going to hold a modified public hearing to start with. I would just like to, before we do that, run through what was done so far as specific concerns at our last public hearing. The public hearing then would be open to anybody that did not have an opportunity to speak at the last one due to notification. And for the board, if I've missed any, if you would please add in here. But the specific concerns that we took away from the last public hearing was the impact to the beach area, the possible impact to wildlife on the Rocky Point, the view of what is being proposed from Indian Point, the possible impact to property value, possible impact to safety due to the proximity of the pier and the boats to the roped off beach area, the possible impact to water quality, and what the boat traffic pattern would be. Based on those comments, did I miss any that anybody feels we captured that? Based on those comments, we decided it would be prudent to go on to a site walk. The board conducted the site walk on February 22nd. All board members were present. We looked at the pier area that was identified by the applicant as to where it was proposed construction. We looked at the beach location with respect to the proposed piers, noted the wildlife areas that were addressed at the first public hearing, and also the proximity of the rocky outcrop that was also addressed as a specific concern. So that's where we stand. If there are any, I'll open the public comment at this point. If there's anybody that would like to speak that has not had a chance to do so because of our notification problem, could do so now. If you would stand to the podium, state your name and address affiliation with the project.
Good evening,
Good
Mr.
evening.
Chair. My name is Keith Richard, and I'm an attorney. I'm here on behalf of Indian Point Owners Association. I would like to just begin first. This is there are some visuals that another person will be talking about after me. I'm just here on behalf of one of the owners of Indian Point, but her presentation uses these visuals. We asked the secretary before, and we're told that we need to get your permission.
Oh, yeah, you have to stay at that.
Do we have permission? Just permission to give
Sure,
these?
yes.
Thank you. So as I said, my name is Keith Richard, and you folks have before you a proposal to install what is a very large docking system in a pretty tight and sensitive spot. It's going to impact a pristine lake, the people and businesses nearby who use and love it, and the very character of the area. My interpretation of the last public hearing that happened here was that the board believes that because DEP and other state agencies are reviewing this proposal, that the scope of the board's responsibility and authority is limited. That besides issues such as parking and fire safety, it's really not your job to police what goes into the water. And let me be very clear about that. That view is mistaken. In Maine, we operate under what's called home rule, meaning that local government decides matter of local concern. And that's especially true of land use. Whatever the DEP or any other state agency decides, you always have the authority to vote something down, including this proposal. You shouldn't be looking to follow the state's lead. Instead, you have an independent obligation to apply your ordinances to protect the public interest and the people that you serve. And I want to begin by highlighting the mandatory standards that apply to this proposal. And this application is a site plan that has been submitted to the town. And your site plan ordinance, Article 10A, states that the purpose of site plan review is to ensure suitable development that will not harm the town or the environment. And it sets forth some objectives for what site plan review is about, what you should be striving for in applying the ordinance. To conserve natural beauty, that structures and development be harmonious with the surrounding areas, that any proposal improve property values.
Are you just going to read the ordinances to us now? Is that?
Mr. Chair, I've prepared a presentation, and I'd like to speak to the legal issues that this board is considering.
Yeah, as long as you can do it in a rather succinct manner and not read us the ordinances, that would be
Well,
fine.
well, respectfully, Mr. Chair, I'm not reading directly from the ordinances.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And to protect the environment for the health and well-being of residents. So Port Harbor submitted a minor site plan review application, but this planning board should consider this as a major site plan review. Article 10B6 states that this board has the authority by a vote for a minor site plan review application to be reviewed as a major site plan review application. Three grounds in which that might occur. If you have conflicting technical information, there is significant public interest in a proposal, or when you have a high level of interest in the immediate vicinity. I would submit to you, members of the board, that all three of those are present here, and therefore you should consider this as a major site plan review. It's important that one of the differences between major and minor site plan review is whether you're looking at only the proposal, the change in use, and limiting your review to that area, or whether you look at a proposal as a whole. You look at the existing uses, structures, and the entirety of a site. Given that it's not clear what review, if any, was undertaken for the existing slips and marina uses at this property, this board at the very least should vote to have the proposal undergo full major site plan review to get a full picture. And I want to emphasize that there are a number of issues for a board to consider, even in minor site plan review. As the chair stated at the beginning of this meeting, the burden is on the applicant to prove that this project meets each and every standard, and that should be based on credible evidence. A failure of an applicant to prove they meet each standard is alone a basis to vote a proposal down. At the last meeting in February, this board was discussing section 16D of your shoreline zoning ordinance. I want to emphasize that's not the only applicable ordinance section that you can consider the concerns of the public on this proposal. You also have Article 10E and 10F of your site plan ordinance. And your ordinance says that applies to all site plan applications. So this application as a minor site plan application, Article 10E, Article 10F both apply. You also have Section 15C of your shoreline zoning ordinance, and that sets forth a number of standards that I want to emphasize a few of those here. Section 15C has 12 subsections for the board to consider when you're looking at a dock project. And I see the most relevant here as C3, the location shall not interfere with existing developed or natural beach areas. C4, the facility shall be located so as to minimize adverse effects on fisheries. Section C5, the facility shall be no larger in dimension than necessary to carry on the activity and be consistent with the surrounding character of the area. Section C11, that permanent structures undergo review by the Department of Environmental Protection, and that C12, that vegetation, if removed, can only be removed or disturbed by a permit from the planning board. I have reviewed the January cover letter from Sebago Technics to the application that they filed with your code enforcement office. And I have to say I was pretty surprised to read the rather cursory and conclusory application of your ordinance standards, because one would think that the marina was proposing a change of use that was so insignificant there's really nothing to see here. But based upon site plan and shoreland zoning ordinance, I see 6 areas that are deficient in this application. The first area is traffic and parking safety. This applicant has not provided credible evidence of traffic and parking impacts. We heard in February that they couldn't find a good traffic study for a marina and essentially made up assumptions based on what we can assume was questionable data. That's all guesswork and it's pretty unreliable, and there's no plan for parking overflow, which we know is a possibility. This board has authority pursuant to Article 10.3b, minor site plan review submission requirements, to require that this applicant commission a traffic study during the peak season for this site. And even if this application is not voted down, or if the application is not voted down, that study should be ordered, and a review of this specific use at this specific location should be undertaken. The second deficiency is the impact on beach areas. Now, in order to meet Section 15C3 of your ordinance, this board would have to conclude that the docks shall not interfere with existing, developed, or natural beach areas. The applicant's January letter addresses beaches and states, the location of the proposed dock expansion does not interfere with existing, developed, or natural beach areas. Members of the board, I would submit that is completely unsupported by the evidence. This proposal is directly on top of the beach situated at Indian Point. There's another beach at St. Ebos across the channel that would necessarily be affected by boat traffic. You also have another beach, the Raymond Town Beach, further north. So there are 3 beaches potentially impacted by this proposal. The evidence establishes that the proposal will interfere with a beach area, and that failure to meet that standard by itself is a basis to vote this proposal down. Third, the impact on health. You heard it from people, and you'll hear it again from the folks that live right down there on the top of this marina. They're in the best position to tell you what they've seen. And they've seen trash, they've seen fuel, waste, pollution, and those are all things that impact public health. The most credible people that can speak to what impact the boats down there have are the people who are right next door. Fourth, the impact on visual and scenic features. I understand that the planning board has visited this site, and we have a graphic that depicts what the boats will look like from the Indian Point Beach, which is in the packet of information that was just handed out. I'm not going to get into that packet, but one of the depictions you will see is a rendering of the view of the docks based on the specifications of the proposal, standing on the Indian Point Beach and looking outward. There's no question that the views in the beach there will not be the same. There's a significant impact to the property owners, not just on the Indian Point side, but also to St. Ebos on the other side. And the fact that the docks here are constructed using wood, because the application states there are no anticipated impacts to scenic area, the site is already used as a marina, and the improvements associated with this project will not greatly impact existing scenery or natural beauty, as most building materials are made of wood and are natural looking. You know, the fact that the docks are made of wood is irrelevant. You have to look both at the structure that's going in as well as how it's going to be used. How about the boats, canopies, gear, coolers, other visual impacts that this activity will bring directly in the view of the people on the beach? Fifth, the impact on fisheries, water pollution, erosion, and sedimentation. You know, this is a highly invasive project and proposal that's going to disturb the lake bottom, and pile driving will create a lot of sedimentation in that area. I actually spoke with a rep over at Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, and they had recommended that this pile driving not occur until after the spawning season had finished, which is, I understand, to be sometime in late July, towards the end of the summer. But my understanding is that Port Harbor wants to go ahead as soon as possible, and my understanding is that they anticipate they want to start in April. The sixth consideration, and I think this one really sums up what this controversy is about, is that the proposal be no larger than necessary to the use and that it be consistent with the surrounding area. Port Harbor already has a number of slips, and this expansion is not necessary to their operation as a marina or to do their business, but they want more. And the problem with that is that it goes too far and it puts one property owner's use over the many. I've been on both sides of these issues. I've represented a marina installing docks before. There are good projects and there are bad projects. It really depends where and why. For many reasons, this is simply a bad project. Sebago Lake is not Lake Winnipesaukee. And each new use, expansion, or development takes things in a direction, and there's really no going back. I think we recognize that these are pretty modern times, but that doesn't mean we can't give each proposal thorough and careful contemplation. We need to consider both the present uses and how new uses will impact future generations. This board is called upon all the time to balance the rights of competing interests, owners, and the public. And this proposal, if approved, would put the interests of one above dozens and dozens of people that make reasonable use of their property. And they've been doing so for decades in a manner that's respectful of others. I urge the board to vote this proposal down and to deny the site plan application and requested permit. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to speak that has not had a chance? Yes, sir. Back or front? Doesn't, either one.
Hi, I'm John Salas. I'm 13 Flying Hallway, Indian Point.
Hi, John.
I oppose the construction of this dock. Some of the imagery that you're going to see in the pamphlet and stuff that's been handed out to you has some of the stuff that I've worked on and looked at how this is really going to impact not only the visual but the rest of the area around there. Page 2, you can actually see where a lot of the new construction is going on. The current dock that you see in there in yellow, that's closest to the land, is the stuff that's currently sitting on the just off the shore. All the red docking is the new proposal. And to give the other indications, Indian Point Beach right there with the yellow lines, they have buoys already out there where the swim lines go to, how they encase or encompass the swim area. You can also see the swim raft that's been out there for decades. And as you can see where the red docks actually come into play, they're actually falling right on top of one of the buoys that's indicated for the swim area. So obviously that's not going to be an area they're going to be able to drive a boat in and out of on the bottom half of all these slips that you're seeing. The boats that they're talking about putting in there are 25 to 30, 35, or 30-foot boats. If you look to the left in the bottom section, you can also see existing moorings for sailboats that have been there for decades as well. And that's, again, right in the path of anything that they were talking about putting in for their new proposed docks and the slips on that side. There's no way you're going to be able to get power boats in and out of there safely with swimmers, existing buoys, existing moorings, and such. Those are a couple of the major things that I can see right off the bat when I see this. The other things that I have, it's like more of the heartfelt aspect of it, is the visuals you're going to see. Everybody that's been on this beach has been able to see the wide open expanse of the lake over all the years that they've been able to come out here. Putting all these boats in here, if you go to the next page on there, which is page 3, there's a visual of standing on the beach just a few years ago with the addition of the current dock that they've set up, and then the proposed outlook of what the visual is going to be with all the new boats sitting out there. That is horrendous to look at. Nobody's going to want to see that. It's going to devalue the properties across the board. Everybody in Indian Point is going to lose valuation on their property. The next part is just talking about the impact of like the wash coming off of these boats. They have about a dozen bib outlets for washing each one of the boats, and not everybody comes through and has the wherewithal on how to use the proper materials to wash off boats. They'll wash off with whatever they have, and there's another study that shows that has been going on for years on Sebago Lake for as far as phosphorus matter that gets into the water and how it affects the fishery, or excuse me, not the fishery, but the water and the fish in the water. You add all of that right into this one small spot, that's going to pollute this entire beach. All the oil and everything else, anything you wash off a boat, whether it's all the fish that you may have caught on this lake and you basically washing off all the chum off the back of your boat into the waters, it's all going to land right on the beach here, either side. There's no stopping that. There's no way to do it. And who's going to clean that up? We haven't seen anything on how they're going to take care of this possibility and inevitability. It's going to be all over there. I've come up here for years and taken kayaks out from this very point right along the shoreline, and just almost to the peak of where they are with their proposed dock is where I've been watching loons pop up in and out of the water right in the same spot, the same area. That's not going to be here if this goes through. You're going to lose that wildlife. You're going to lose the scene and the sense of why people want to come up here. Those are, heartfelt things that everybody here, what most people are here to really stress why they don't want this to happen. And that's what I really want you guys to really think about there. I know there's a lot of legal matters why this shouldn't or should be looked at, but as far as like the heartfelt part of it, this is the majority of the people here. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, John. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Paul Cody, and I'm the president of St. Ebo's. Our property abuts Jordan Bay Marina and this project. First of all, I want to thank the Raymond Council for the opportunity to address you. St. Ebo's has the following concerns, some of which have been reviewed with the owners of Jordan Bay, and we look forward to working with them in the spirit of being good neighbors to both St. Ebo's and our beloved Big Sebago. Light pollution. We are concerned that having light fixtures on the new docks will be shining toward our property and illuminating those adjacent areas. Noise pollution. We are concerned that all these additional boats and owners will potentially make for very noisy evenings and nights. There's another marina where parties go well on into the night by the boat owners who utilize their docks. That is a concern for us. Environmental concerns. Additional boats and motors could definitely affect the quality of water adjacent to St. Ebo's North Beach, which directly abuts Jordan Bay. Wildlife could also be adversely affected, such as loons and fish. I'm not sure what the solution is, but these concerns should be addressed by this council as it considers what is best for our beautiful Big Sebago Lake. Thank you.
Paul, does your property go all the way up and up to actually the marina itself, the slip?
There is land between St. Ebo's and the channel.
Land
So we're
between,
not actually totally abutting there.
okay,
Well,
but say,
we do abut there.
you
I
do abut,
their
but
land,
there's property in the
there's
center.
a strip of land there.
Got it, thank you,
Where the channel.
right.
Hi, my name's Bill Hartley. I own the property right next to the marina. It's actually between Indian Point and the marina. It's approximately 7 acres with about 550 feet of frontage between Indian Point and them.
And who's, I'm sorry, and who?
My name's Bill Hartley.
Yeah, I didn't, where is your property?
It's at 1326 Roosevelt Trail. It's
Between-
right next to the marina.
Can you
so
point it
this-
out to us on the aerial view here?
Well, here. Yeah, I brought pictures too.
Oh,
But I'll point it out to you.
thanks, Bill.
It's this U-shaped driveway right
Yeah.
here.
Okay, but,
And so basically, it goes down to this red line. I'm assuming that's what this
Give him that
area
mic.
is my property.
Yep, you need a microphone.
okay,
please.
we got it, yeah,
Oh, sorry.
that's all right, Bill, it's
That's
not,
a mic right there.
we're okay now,
All right. But anyway, now you know where I live.
Yes.
Or where the property is
Right.
anyway.
thank you.
I've lived there, or I own that property. Oh, you're not gonna get me to do that. I shake too bad for that. But anyway.
I think we're okay, Bill.
All right. Basically, I've grown up there. I know the area in the Indian Point area very well. Knew it the previous owners. And I was listening to the attorney talk about the natural beaches and all that. That's all filled land. A guy named Jervis filled that in back in the 60s. And it was a swamp. I got a picture of it right here in front of me. The marina had docks out into the water at that time. The town stopped this guy Jervis from filling that in, and all during the 70s it was never allowed to be used. Indian Point Campground couldn't even put a tent out there. Now sometime when I went into service, I came back and all of a sudden there was all these houses out there. All right, stuff changes, I don't care. I mean, good. I'm glad these people found a nice little place that they can afford to have a nice on Sebago Lake. But my point is, the Port Harbor Marina employs a lot of people in the area. There was docks there prior to Indian Point condominiums or whatever they call themselves. Before that, And if Port Harbor Marine is willing to jump through whatever hoops legally they need to do, there's no reason to stop them from doing this. And I know my neighbors are all gonna be upset with me. And I know the lawyer here, the attorney, was saying what a bunch of great people they are, and they probably are for the most part. But I know I had to pay $3,500 to chase one of them off my property because he had been squatting on my property without us knowing it, because I own a pretty substantial chunk of land there. I don't walk it every day. So, you know, I don't think it's right that you should be able to stop them. And they talk about the beach and the wetlands. Well, they didn't seem to care when they were putting their houses there that weren't there as late as probably the early 80s. I'm not sure when the condominium thing showed up. But like I said, it's a damn shame that the economy's not looked at. People in the town work here. All these people are just summer people. And it'd be just wrong to allow that. And I would like to, I don't have a nice big portfolio like this, but I would like to let some people look at these pictures and see that that was a swamp. So, and the other side, St. Hobie's, Pierce Flynn filled that in. That was all swamp. And we all know that Raymond Beach, that was done when they put 302 through in around 54, 55. I've lived here all my life. I know the area pretty well. And I don't think it's right that they should be not able to have this just because these people all think they own everything. When they're just a bunch of summer people that come up here and they own little scraps of land and they pay their taxes, I'm sure, but they shouldn't control the whole world.
Okay, thank you.
And I would like to,
Yes, we will take the
submit
pictures,
that?
definitely.
can I,
Okay.
who do I
Yep.
give it to?
Certainly, you can give them to me.
These are old pictures that I left back if I could get them.
Okay,
Yeah.
we will do that. Thanks, Bill. Oh, really old pictures.
I'm sorry.
Hi, Allison Sarna, 13 Flying Hulls Way at Indian Point. And just to address a couple of the comments, I understand that you feel that a lot of people are out-of-towners, but a majority of the people up there at Indian Point are Mainers. They may not live at Indian Point.
Also, we're not gonna go back and forth.
Okay, but I
Good.
did want to also make a point of overall that the benefit and profit to one should not impede upon the many. Indian Point is a group of 71 taxpayers that in total pay $72,000 in taxes, whereas Port Harbor only pays $34 annually in taxes in that. And so making a profit over that, over the enjoyment, the space may have been a swamp in the 50s, but I have been coming here and swimming and sailing since I was 11 years old. And this is a place that's very important to a lot of us. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Paul Del Nero. I'm at 13 Flying Hulls Way, and I've been looking over a lot of the things here. And one of the things that I see with this whole marina, like the way that the operations go, is it seems as though I'm dealing with item 5 on this large packet, parking and traffic. And it seems as though there's not much concern for how many vehicles really will or could possibly show up there. On page 9, there's a thing that says that in Port Harbor Marina's advertising, it lists over 700 boats stored on the property, quote, with room for more. That's a lot of boats. That's dry storage. But those boats can come out of dry storage, and people do drive in with their cars to use those boats. Back on page 4, the calculations, which were being disputed, I think, at the last meeting, were of 0.6 cars, parking spots per slip. That's not just the slips that are available. There's also boats, 700 plus boats in that place. People can come and use those boats. I added the 700 to the, I think, 120 docks that I could kind of count, including the stuff that they're proposing in the lake. 820 total. That's a big number. So I said, well, let's cut that by in a quarter, just a quarter, and let's take that down to 205 cars. That's a lot of cars. And I wanted to point out that one more back to the page 2. There are 13 boats out of the existing slips, not right in that picture. 13 boats are out, and there are 24 cars parked there. That's not 0.6 per boat. That seems like there's, even in this one picture from, it says it's a 2020 picture, but in that one picture, there's twice as many cars as there are boats. And that's just the ones that are in the slips. That's not even counting the ones that could have possibly gone out from the 700 that are stored at that place. It just seems incredible that the parking and the traffic concerns would not be outrageous with this. I'm not in favor of this. I'm against this project. And the parking and traffic just seems totally out of control. Thank you.
You're welcome. Is there anyone else? Okay, I am going to close the public hearing and ask Will if you would start us off with any changes that have occurred since the last time.
Okay. Will Haskell, acting as kind of interim town planner on this project. So we received the updated revised application documents. I received them on March 3rd, I guess. I'm not sure when they came into the town, but so I had basically prepared an update to the original technical memorandum. Kind of went down through the new information that they submitted. So I think at the last meeting we had some discussion around the parking generation rates and the use of 0.6 spaces per wet slip and 0.2 spaces per dry slip. The applicant has presented information based on their research in terms of they came up with those numbers based on their research. There really isn't a lot of published. Again, typically we would go to like the Institute of Transportation Engineers, ITE Parking Generation Manual for that information. The challenge with this is that for marina use, they have one project that they've referenced in there. It happens to be that the rate that they recommend based on that one can be around 0.6, so it kind of confirms that number. The question is whether the 0.2 for the dry slips is a reasonable number or not. So we had a little bit of discussion around that. I think there was some discussion from board members about potentially wanting a traffic or a parking study done, but so that's still kind of an outstanding item, I think, that needs to be discussed. The new plan also updates the ADA parking spaces, so they've added 4 additional parking spaces for accessible use down the driveway along the docks. They have 1 other existing space up by the store, so that equals a total of 5, which based on their total number of parking spaces would be adequate. There was some discussion about the parking spaces and potential conflicts with boats being stored. And if you look at some of the aerial photos that are around, there's a fair number of boats that are stored in the area that they're proposing new parking spaces. The applicant has submitted information or a statement basically saying that a lot of their boats are stored on blocks rather than trailers, with basically saying that there aren't going to be a lot of trailers sitting in that area during the peak season when people would be parking there most likely. And then they also say that they lease property over in Casco where they can actually store trailers when they're not being used. So basically, again, my understanding from the last meeting was that the applicant indicated that all the boats and equipment in that area would not be stored there during the peak use of the boating season. They had updated their calculation, or the parking calculations from the first submission. There was some discrepancies in terms of number of slips and that type of thing, so they've got an updated parking calculation in there. There was some discussion, or I had some questions relative to whether there was going to be some additional grading necessary for some of the new parking spaces. They basically confirmed that there would not be. However, there would be some grading and potential clearing to run the fire service out to the new docks off the end of the point there. There's a wooded area, and they're going to be running a fire line out through that wooded area. They've added that to the plan, and they've got some notations on the plan relative to that. My new comment on that is that I think their note says that disturbance would be minimized during construction in that area, and it would be allowed to naturally revegetate, which I would just say that, you know, you'd be better off stating that that area is going to be reseeded, mulched and reseeded to fully stabilize that, rather than letting it naturally revegetate over time. Let's see. What else we got here? I think there was some additional communications and updates relative to the fire department, and adding some no parking signs to ensure that there's adequate emergency vehicle access down through the 24-foot access drive down through the parking area there, and they've added signage relative to that. And then I think I've also provided some updates relative to the standards in section 16D of the shoreland zoning provisions. So they kind of went through each one of those provisions, and I basically just tried to summarize in my memo, which I'm assuming you all have, of what their comments are there relative to the what is it, 9 different standards there. So there were a few other comments at the end of their application document, just summarizing some other items that had come up at the last meeting and at the site walk. So they provided some narrative relative to visual impacts, and I think you'll see they've got some plans that they're going to present here tonight as well on that. They talked a little bit more about the concerns about overflow parking, noting that they've never had a problem with overflow parking out on Route 302, and reiterating that there isn't any kind of a public boat launch there, so it's a little bit different than, say, the public launch up the road, where sometimes there are cars that are parking out on the road there. So that all kind of ties back to that whole parking generation rate and that whole discussion. I think we still need to have some further discussion on. They reiterated that the DEP permitting that is, I believe, currently underway, that they've submitted a DEP Natural Resource Protection Act permit, and the other component is that a lot of this site is already permitted by DEP through a multi-sector general permit, which is specific to marina use. So a lot of the existing stormwater and everything from the existing site is all permitted underneath that multi-sector general permit through DEP. They're really, again, aren't really proposing any new land modifications. Again, they've got that small little trench area that they're gonna excavate for the new fire line, but they're not opening up new land, disturbing new land, or paving new land for the parking areas and that type of thing as part of this project. I think that is pretty much the summary of the updates that have happened since the last time.
Well, does the parking ordinances that in the shoreline zoning, is that applicable in this case?
That may be a town attorney question. My understanding on that is that it's a water-related use. The primary use is a marina, and that the parking associated with that water-dependent use is secondary to that primary use, and it's part of the marina project. And given that the marina is a approved use within the shoreline zone, and that's been my interpretation of it. But
what about the specific design of that parking lot? Is that not applicable? So we went through, I think it was as a result of the last time we really looked at parking in shoreline zoning, and there was going to be cluster parking of 50. I think it's like 50 spaces, and
They're not making it, they're not creating a new parking lot.
right.
Yeah.
They are not, so it would not be applicable.
It's not, the only thing in front of you is the actual work they're doing, which is the new.
And even though there were some modifications to that parking, it does not get
Is there modification to the lot, or are they parking more spots in an existing lot?
Well, they've changed the ADA spots. They've created ADA spots.
Yeah. Yeah, you can go on, I'll
Okay.
just take a look.
Do you know where I am?
Tell me the section.
24 of 70.
Okay.
Page 24 of 70.
Okay.
In shoreline. Okay, do you have any questions for Will before we go?
I do about the parking. Right now, we're adding, I think, 49 new slips, but the parking lot is the same. So rather than trying to calculate based on a theoretical, factor, it seems like we should look at what will generate from 49 additional slips. I mean, right now, the parking lot, I would assume, is fairly well utilized. During the season, is it pretty full? I mean, is there room for, theoretically, there could be 40 more cars, 49?
I mean, I think that's really what a parking study is going to tell you,
Yeah.
because I mean, we can hear what the applicant has to say relative to their position in terms of what's currently parked on the site during a peak day with the number of slips, but we don't really have an existing condition to compare to other than what they tell us. So
It seems like a parking study should be done for this.
Okay, anything else? You guys happy down there? Okay, Rob, you're up.
Thank you very much. Rob McSorley with Sebago Technics. I'm here representing Jordan Bay Marina, an expansion undertaken by Port Harbor Marine, which is an employee-owned business, owned by a couple of people, but all the people who work there. The expansion, we're proposing to go from 67 slips up to 116 slips by an additional 49 net. 59 will be new, and we'll be deleting 10 slips. Once again, we presented this project originally to you on February 12th in all the original materials, and then we did have the site walk on February 22nd. And I'd like to go through the comments and how we have addressed them, and then some of the issues that have been come up, and maybe address some of the stuff that has been presented tonight, if that's acceptable. First of all, we very methodically listed all the changes that we did in our response. First one was the fire department. We hope that we have met the needs of the fire department relative to deletion of those parking spaces in the addition of the additional signage at the neck down spot there.
Yep.
So I believe we're all taken care of there. One of the other things that were brought up was whether or not we had addressed the section 16 subsection D procedure for administering the permits in shoreline zone. That was part of the original application. In fact, the site plan 10E and 10F and the applicable sections in the shoreline were all listed item by item on those applicable things and how we met them. So, but we did reiterate the 16D conditions, and I'm just going to breeze through a couple of those. The first one was maintain safe and healthful conditions. We have worked with the fire department relative to fire protection, relative to additional fire protection on the docks and access for the fire department. We also have a procedure right now for the clearance of wastewater from boats on the facility, and that has been ongoing for some time with the marina. Will not result in water pollution, erosion, and sedimentation to surface water. And we basically have stated in our package that we are not creating any additional impervious surfaces on this project. We're utilizing what's there, and we're minimizing the disturbance to the amount that we can. Really, the only disturbance land side is to provide for the additional fire protection that the town wants on the docks. Very minimal disturbance, and relative to the disturbance through the existing area for the fire line, we propose to do that between trees and not taking any trees down. And our plans is to put a conservation mix back there. And that's what we mean by a natural recruitment. Of course, seeding it with the natural mix and letting it take back over. Also relative to the pollution, erosion, sediment control, the marina is covered right now under multi-sector general permit. They have to apply usually on a 5-year basis relative to coverage under the multi-sector general permit. And what that curtails is a notice of intent to the DEP, but they also have to have a written plan relative to how to deal with things that cause pollution or could cause problems with the lake or whatnot. And they have hired St. Germain Collins to do that. And they have a current plan that's administered by St. Germain Collins. They come out quarterly to the site and inspect the site. Yearly, they do a more comprehensive review. And also, on top of that, they do training with the employees. And this is kind of, well, it's required, of course, because of the marina use, but there are other uses that aren't a marina per se, but have as many docks as our marina, but they do not have that oversight from the DEP. But that is part of how we meet the standard for water pollution, erosion, sediment control. It has also been mentioned that we will be disturbing the substrate for the bottom of the lake when we do the piling. That has been noted by IFNW, Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, and they have asked us to put floating turbidity barriers when we do that. And also that when we do that, if there are any fish within our confines, that we relocate them prior to doing any of the pile driving. So we're doing a little bit more extra as part of our MDEP approval. we adequately provide for the elimination of wastewater, as I stated above or before, was there are a pump out procedure, and that's handled as part of the MSGP for emptying sewage from the boats that use the facility. Will not have an adverse impact on spawning grounds, fish, aquatic life, bird, and wildlife habitat. One of the key parts of our submission to MDEP is the overview or review by IF&W, the Inland Fish Wildlife Department of the state of Maine. And they have reviewed it, and they have commented on the project, and we are addressing those comments by the addition of floating turbidity barriers during the construction of the piles. Other than that, they have not noted any particular issues relative to that requirement within the shoreline zone. Will conserve shore cover and visual as well as actual points of access to inland waters. There's no shoreline that's public along this property. There was no prior access, so we are not eliminating any access that was there before as part of our project. The protection of archaeological and historical resources, once again, is part of the DEP submission and your submission. We do apply to the Maine State Historical Preservation Commission, and they look at the project. We have to send them photographs of adjacent areas. They have a database of areas in artifact areas within towns and whatnot. And when we come upon those, they will let us know and know that we have to do something. Typically, they don't publish those because they don't want people to go and start digging for artifacts at different places. So when we apply, they do look at their database and say, oh, by the way, we do have an issue here. We need to address this before you move forward. And that's not the case on here. Will not adly adverse existing commercial fisheries or maritime activities in the Commercial Fisheries Maritime Activities District. Doesn't apply. Pretty straightforward. Will avoid problems associated with floodplain development and use. We aren't not doing any development within the floodplain. We're not building any houses or any improvements that flooding would affect. So we're in conformance with that. Relative to the Section 15 land use standards, once again, we went through those item by item in the original submission, and I believe Will had reviewed those, and I think we addressed all outstanding issues relative to that. Relative to the last meeting, there were some specific requests that were made of us. And the first one was for a typical section for the fire line installation and the placement of the erosion control measures for the fire line on the plans. And that has been added. Pretty straightforward on that. And then relative to, we needed to address the adjacent uses and concerns relative to visual impacts. And that was kind of the basis also for the site walk that we had on the 22nd. And what I'd like to do is go up to the board and.
Rob, would you take the mic with you?
He
That's...
should have the lavalier mic.
Oh, you're wired, huh?
I'm wired.
All right.
So once again, this is Jordan Bay Marina. We're proposing some docks out in front of the existing marina. A net 49 slips, 59 total new, 10 existing slips will be removed. As part of our site walk, we had gone out there, we had our surveyors go out there, and we calculated the exact points to about the 100th where these points were going to be relative to the extension of our property line out into Sebago Lake and the setbacks required by the Submerged Lands Department of Agricultural Conservation and Forestry. And those were reviewed at our meeting in the field. Relative to the impacts, I kind of did an overall map here to begin with to show you where our marina is relative to the other access points for boats coming into the lake. There is the main state boat launch, which is to the north of us, and that's over half a mile away on the lake. There is another key access point here, which is the Panther Run channel where the Panther Run Marina is, and also there are boats there from Indian Point along their project. And so by that you can see that we're really not right on top of everything. You know, if we had two channels right next to each other, we had crisscross patterns, that would definitely be a difficult situation to navigate. But that's not what we got. We got at least 800 feet to the channel down at Panther Run and over half a mile away to the state boat launch. And when we were out there on Saturday of the site walk, we were able to go and do a little look-see about what the view would be. I hope the board noted that. We have specifically stated in there relative to what you would be seeing relative to certain points. On this map, we have shown you what part of the proposed marina would be seen fully by the cottages or units over on the Indian Point, which cottages might see part of them, and then what cottage would not have a view of the marina. Now the interesting thing is that the distance from that viewpoint on the other side is about 800 feet away too. So when you look at what you're going to look at for a dock, in your view shed, if you held two popsicle sticks together at the end of your arm's length, that's the amount of your view that would be impeded. And that's kind of what we've done here on this presentation. That white line, the thin white line, is if you were to hold this out like that at arm's length, that's the amount of view this marina and dock expansion would take up. You would still see the lake, you would still see the opposing shore, you still see the opposing tree line. There are no scenic vistas that are there. And what you're looking at is what is common on a lake in the state of Maine. It's some docks and some boats. It's not something that's unheard of. Usually when you're looking at scenic impacts, you're looking at a use that is incompatible in that setting. Like if we were to put a 3-story condo building right adjacent to the shoreline, and they would be looking at a condo, that would not be in place with Sebago Lake. Then, relative to the beach, we supplied here a picture that was actually taken by a member of Indian Point. If you were to stand on the nearest edge of beach, which is 125 to 130 feet away, some people have mentioned that it's 25 feet or 45 feet. It's more like 125 to 130 feet. You would basically be looking that in your view shed, or ruler, less than a ruler length. That's what's going to be impacting your view as far as the marina, the boats, and the docks. You still see, and you can see it in the picture here, you can see the lake in front of it, you can see the lake behind it, you see the shoreline, you see the tree line. There is no other scenic vista behind it. There is a tree, a mountain view over here. I think it's Douglas Mountain, but that will not be impeded by the proposed marina. Once again, when we were out there, we had staked out a point on the property line opposite where we were going to do the docks and the two outside corner of the docks. And that was to give you a representation of where we were going to put the docks relative to the existing scene and whatnot there. What we show here is the requirements for submerged lands relative to the placement of structures. You have to be a minimum of 25 feet away from what's called the littoral sideline. The littoral area is the area in front of your property which is usable by you if you want to do a submerged land lease through the state of Maine for docks or whatever. In those rules, they require you to maintain at least 25 feet off that littoral sideline. And what we have shown here is basically the extension of our property lines in showing the offset of those 25 feet and the fact that we will meet that setback. Just to note that not only do we need to meet that, but our abutters need to meet that. And the submerged land department defines structure as basically any buoy, any float, any mooring, any dock, any impediment to navigation, including rope lines. So that needs to be set back 25 feet from the littoral sideline for that property. And so we have indicated that line here on the Indian Point side. We did take from an aerial and kind of try to superimpose where we thought the dock had been at one time, the floating or float, and it is off the 25 feet. So that's not a problem with that. But it also applies to buoys, floats, rope lines, and any impediment to navigation. And relative to, going back to this presentation for just a second, the state of Maine has a law specific, I think it's Title 12, Section 1900, that swim areas in the state of Maine on inland waters are required to be permitted. They are permitted through the same Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry, but through the Boating Facilities Department. And it's a requirement, the law is very specific, that for a person to construct or maintain a swim area, you need to get a permit from the department. We have contacted the department and they have no record relative to a permitted swim area adjacent to our proposed expansion. So. This last map, what we wanted to show you, typically when you're looking at rights in front of waterfront properties, there are several different methods that you go through to determine what your rights are and what your neighbor's rights are. We have highlighted 3 of them here. You know, the easiest one is called the extension method. Take your property line, extend it out in the water, and that's your littoral sideline. DCAF has another procedure which requires you to go from your one property corner to the next property corner, draw a line, from that line go perpendicular out for both properties. Then if they converge, there's one procedure. When they diverge, you basically split the middle of that divergence, and that is the littoral sideline. The third method that we put here is a similar method. It's called the colonial method. It's been around for a while, and it basically does the same thing, but it typically follows the shoreline instead of going directly from property corner to property corner. And if you look at the map that we provided, the red line here is the colonial method, where our littoral sideline would be. If you use the DCAF method, it would be the yellow line, which is what we would need if we got a submerged land lease for our docks. And what we're using is the green line, which is the most conservative of the three. And then we use that, and we hold our 25 feet back from that line instead of the DCAF line or the line created from the colonial method. So we believe that we pretty adequately addressed our surrounding neighborhood and what was in there. In the other comments that Will had discussed or alluded to, we had heard a comment that this expansion is going to result in the storage of trailers and vehicles out on 302. This isn't that type of facility. We don't have an access for individual people to bring their boats in. We do not have that type of use. Only people who have their boat at the marina, whether it's in a wet slip or on a dry slip, are who come to use the site. So we shouldn't have anybody parking out front. We've never had a problem with that. We do note that there has been a problem up the street at the state boat launch, but there has not been one in front of our property. There was a comment that the proposed expansion will affect the channel markers out in front of the marina. Those channel markers were put in by the marina to make sure that boats didn't hit the rocks or ground out in that location. So it's not a state agency that put them in, it's the marina that took care of them. The comment that the project is going to cause irreparable harm to the environment and adjacent preserve. Once again, we covered under an MSGP permit. They have to go through quite a bit to make sure they maintain the site. And if there is spills or anything like that, they have things online, booms and whatnot, to take care of that. Their employees are trained in different environmental areas, including hazmat. There's been a lot said about the Loon Echo Preserve. There was a conservation easement over the adjacent wetland at one time, which is kind of just south of the marina land. For some reason, it was determined that the prior owner didn't have the rights to convey that easement. So in 2005, I believe it was, the Loon Echo Preserve Group released its claim on it back to the homeowners association and said it's not ours and it's not a conservation easement. And there's no other conservation easement of record right now. And as far as we know, it's only a wetland. Notwithstanding, we're not doing anything in the wetland. We're not doing anything to impact the wetland. So there is no environmental impact from our project on that area. There's a question who polices the activities on the lake. Of course, the Maine State Warden Service is a primary one. We believe there are other groups. The municipalities have rights and have, I think, navigation vehicles to go out on the lake and address issues and whatnot. And of course, Portland Water District is the overseer of the water quality of the lake. And they, of course, are reviewing or reviewed our project, as they do every planning board item within the lake region. And so that's the people who kind of oversee the jurisdiction of the lake. Once again, it was discussed that we have all the boat storage on the site, and there was a comment presented earlier that we have 700 boats stored on the site. I think that was kind of taken out of context from our website information. That's all Port Harbor facilities, is 700 boats. We have a certain number of slips. We even came here at the first meeting and told you we have the ability for 100 dry dock. And there was a discrepancy on the plans in between the parking. If you remember, we had put that we have 100 slips in our parking calculation, and it only shows 80 in the building. That was because we have another 20 potential in the front building. So we made sure that we took care of the parking required for all slips or uses on the site. And relative to that, in parking, in how to address the parking, once again, ITE's parking study did not have a sufficient amount of information for this type of use. And that is typically who we go to. A lot of your municipal codes, whether it's your code or other planning codes, are typically drawn out of those and manipulated somewhat per the local feel of what a board may feel is adequate for their particular jurisdiction, looking at that overall. Once again, the ITE did not have sufficient information, so we went to the experts. First of all, I talked to those guys, because they're going to run a marina, and they're not going to want to deal with clients who can't park their cars and use their boats. People are paying a lot of money for that. Secondly, we reached out and looked at some of the main sources of data relative to parking for marinas. And to tell you the truth, the main one is California. A lot of the countries or uses around the country basically reference the state of California's parking information for marinas. We noted the several different sources in our response letter of what we used, and we used the higher end for wet slips relative to 0.6 spaces per wet slip. We did use on the lower end of the dry slip, and that's once again based on experience. And once again, we're not going to shortchange ourselves for parking because they depend upon their clients for their business. I'm not sure that a parking study is really gonna prove fruitful at this point. You know, we basically, we went and we took a combination of both the resources that we found relative to marinas and the town's requirements, and used the conservative numbers from there and meshed them to come up with a rate of parking that's necessary for the entire site. And we have exceeded that. Now, if we take a little bit higher number for the dry storage boats, we might be a couple short, and we can produce a couple more parking spaces. We have some other places on site. But a parking study is not going to be extremely fruitful at this time. Once again, relative to the standards, we did go through the site plan application standards. Believe those were all reviewed by Will, and we responded to all comments, and I believe we have affirmation back that everything has been sufficient relative to that. Relative to the criteria that you will be using to vote on this project. The criteria and standards, a lot of them did not apply right off the bat because we weren't doing anything that would affect those areas, like preservation of landscape, relation of proposed buildings to the environment, and vehicular access. We already have vehicular access. All those areas we did not comment on in our submission because they weren't applicable. But we did look at those applicable items, starting with off-street parking, and we just had the discussion about the parking rates and how we have come up with determining what is appropriate for the site for parking. Relative to surface water drainage, once again, we're not changing the site. The site is as is. We also, once again, are covered under a MSGP permit, which requires us to monitor what potential pollutants can get into the lake. But there is no additional impervious areas that are causing or would cause a surface water drainage issue. Utilities, we showed, as requested, the existing utilities for the site on the plans. We will be, once again, installing some additional fire lines at the request of the town for the protection on the docks. We will be putting some photocell lights on the docks. I know that's a concern by the neighbor relative to the amount of lights and whatnot. They will be shining down in low voltage. Once again, we do have a holding tank that we utilize when tanks from boats have to be emptied. That is emptied on a regular basis. There is a contract with a licensed waste hauler, Blow Brothers, to make sure that that is taken care of. Relative to special features on the site, there are no special features proposed. There's no special equipment or anything proposed on site as part of the project, so that's really not applicable. Exterior lighting, I just mentioned a little bit. The parking lot currently has lighting. We have shown that on the plans. And we also have shown on the individual or the proposed dock plans where we propose the dock lighting, which once again will be the photocells, low voltage, that will go down. Emergency vehicle access, we've worked with the fire department relative to the access. As part of what we submitted originally, we did submit an auto turn analysis to show that we can turn around the town's vehicles at the end We have added additional signage in that area to restrict parking down in that area, so that we to not impact the potential for the emergency vehicles to come in if necessary. Landscaping, once again, is a section that's not applicable. We are going to do some disturbance. Once again, we will go on between trees to put in the proposed fire line, and that will be seeded with a conservation mix so that it naturally takes back over and grows to what it was before. And that's mainly all of the items relative to that you need to address relative to your review of the project. Of course, do your findings of fact. I would like to address now some of the comments that were brought up specifically. First of all, relative to traffic and parking, I think it was erringly stated that we kind of fabricated a traffic numbers or whatnot, but it wasn't that. We didn't address traffic because 49 slips is really not going to produce a lot of more traffic on your road. We looked at that very early on. It's going to be 13 trips in a peak hour that doesn't even come close to tripping any threshold relative to the state or town relative to traffic studies. That's 13 peak trips in the worst condition. Relative to the parking, once again, we didn't willy-nilly kind of throw things out there. We went and we sought information from experts on marinas to determine what we should have. Not only that, we have been conservative. We have laid the spaces out to be 10 feet wide, whereas code allows them to be 9 feet. And we've done that for two reasons: to be conservative, and also we're not going to go out there and stripe a bunch of shell rock or gravel areas. But we were more conservative in the use of the area that we have for parking. Technically, we could go in there by DEP, because that is impervious now, and pave it. We could pave it, and it wouldn't be any different than what it is now. And then we could stripe it, and then we could put 9-foot spaces in there. But we don't think that is really necessary. Relative to the impact of the beach area, once again, the planning board got to go out there and see the location of the beach relative to the docks. We are not on top of them. Once again, they have certain rights and we have certain rights that are dictated by meeting the setbacks within our respective littoral areas in front of our property. And we have tried to be conservative about what we use for our littoral area in front of our site. Impact on health, kind of a nebulous statement. You know, there could also be gas leaks from some other boats that are on docks on the other side of their property, and being their own docks. The good thing is our property, we have to be aware of that and take care of that immediately, and we have to report that to DEP. I think it's a lot of conjecture to throw out a bunch of statements relative to, you know, there's going to be trash, there's going to be, I just don't think it's appropriate. You know, we have addressed what we needed to relative to health. We have boats that sometimes need to have their sewers pumped out. We have a facility for that. We have a licensed waste hauler for that, and we have a procedure for that in our MSGP permit. Impact from visual impact. I try to give you an idea of what you would be seeing relative to where you're standing on the shoreline opposite the docks or right on the beach. The marina, the dock expansion, is not going to obliterate your view of the lake. You're going to be looking at something that is commonly seen on a lake. Boats and docks on lake go together. And the view and what we'll be putting there is going to affect a small part of what you can see in front of you. It won't impact a scenic vista, won't impact the shoreline, won't impact the tree line. And so we believe that this project has met the burden relative to visual impact. It was stated that we have not addressed impact on fisheries and erosion control. I beg to differ. That's why we go to DEP. That's why we address IAW comments. And I don't think there's much more that needs to be said about that. And then the comment that larger than necessary. Well, the interesting thing is this marina and other marinas on Sebago Lake are getting inundated with requests for slips. We even, at the site walk, had people come up to us after the site walk and inquire about a slip. There are not a lot of slips on Sebago Lake. And once again, this is not a corporation of a couple people who are out there trying to look and make a fast buck. This is a company that is employee owned. It's owned by everybody in the company. And they take pride in the facility up here. They take pride in the one in South Portland and the other 3 facilities that they manage and run. You can kind of say it's their baby, you know? So we aren't trying to make it any larger than necessary. We could actually, by the submerged land lease rules, go out to the next channel, which there is no channel in front of us, or halfway across the lake. And there's another criteria. We could go out further than we are seeking today, but we are not. We're going based upon what we think is appropriate. There was a question or a comment that these slips were for 30-foot boats. Don't think so. I think they're going to be more towards the 20-foot size and not 30-foot boats. Maintenance. We have a full-time maintenance staff. As I said before, we are covered under MSGP. We have to go through training relative to pollution sources and whatnot. And we need to maintain the facility, and we have to have it inspected every quarter. And we have to do a yearly complete inspection. And not only that, the employees need to be trained, and all of that needs to be documented. And the marina has been doing that and been paying for that. We already addressed the comment relative to the 700 boats. There's not 700 boats here, once again. Parking versus the boats that are there. Once again, we have an agreement with a property owner in Casco to store trailers and boats from the site. Can I divulge who that is? It's actually the competitor, Panther Run. They lease land from them. So if they need to, when all the boats are put in the water, all the trailers are transported up to this parcel in Casco, which is owned by Panther Run. Not much more to say. Once again, we will be putting a conservation mix so that the disturbed area through the trees revegetates in a natural sense. And we've talked quite a bit about parking and the design. Once again, we don't want to pave it. We don't want to go to 9-foot spaces. We go to 9-foot spaces and we probably have more than enough spaces. We're more than just this marina. And there was a comment also about we haven't provided for overflow parking. I don't know any planning codes that require you to meet overflow parking. There is a parking requirement. There's not a, you need to meet this, oh, by the way, you need to have 10% more in overflow. It's part of your ordinance that the required parking is submitted. And that's why when you go to the mall during the year, and not Christmas, see a lot of parking spaces. So with that, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Rob. Rob, but just back to the lighting that you said, is there, on page 2 of your, are you showing lighting on every slip, or is that just?
It's not every slip. It's just, it's
between the slips.
segmental along the dock.
Okay, and they're downcast
They're
lights,
down.
so,
Yeah, there's solar type lights that go down.
okay.
Yeah.
All righty, thank you. Go ahead, Mike, you ready?
I am ready.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, may I just, with the applicant as well, my name is Leah Reach, and I'm an attorney for the applicant, and I just had a couple of brief procedural questions or submissions, if I might.
Okay?
Okay, thank you. The first point is that I noticed that there was a submission provided to you, multi-pages, diagrams, et cetera, and I think it was from perhaps the association. We have not seen that, and we certainly don't want to spill any more ink that's unnecessary, but just would like to, A, have a copy, and B, have the opportunity to respond if anything new that
Certainly,
we
you can
haven't.
certainly have a copy.
Okay.
In fact, there's probably some extra.
Thank you. I also heard a comment asking to convert this thank you so much, asking to convert the application from a minor to a major site plan review, and we would submit that that's not necessary. In fact, and I think we've heard a theme this evening about conservatism and going beyond. In fact, arguably, under your own site plan review standards, that we don't have to be here in the sense that it clearly talks about how staff site plan review, minor site plan review, applies to only new buildings. And I'm using finger quotes here because building is a defined term, and it talks about any structure having a roof supported by columns or walls. Clearly that's not this, but yet the applicant, Port Harbor, they want to be here, they want to do what's right, and that's why we're here. Again, abundance of caution. The criteria under section 15C, which I believe is called the docks, wharves, piers, that provision, and you may ask your able town attorney to weigh in on this, but we would submit, again, we looked at those criteria, we gave you evidence to suggest that they are in fact met, but arguably they are not even applicable here, because under your land use table, you've got a specific criteria, land use called marina, and you have another called docks, where, wharves. And so clearly, if we look at what is being proposed here, this isn't a dock, this is a marina. A dock is a part of a marina, but so we would suggest to you that 15C is not applicable. In any event, we've met all of those criteria. And one other comment, I heard comment that, there was a compare and contrast about how much tax revenue is generated by the respective uses. I know this board knows well that that is an impermissible consideration, and the only proper things are the criteria under the ordinance. And we would submit that we have more than met those, and we thank you for your time.
3 attorneys, I think this is a record.
Mr. O'Neill, I forgot to divulge one thing. There was an email sent to Scott earlier today from the DEP to give an update. If I could read it in the record. To whom it may concern, I am the DEP project manager for Port Harbor Marine Expansion in the town of Raymond. I was told that there is a town meeting this evening where the project will be discussed. I thought it might be helpful to know where the DEP is at in our review process. At this point, the review from all from other agencies like MDIFW, Maine Department of Inland Fisheries, Army Corps, and BLP are complete. Therefore, I am working on writing up a licensing decision. The statutory deadline for the department to make a decision is April 13th. However, we hope to have a licensing decision before then. If you have any further questions regarding this information, please let me know.
Thanks, Rob. Questions? Mike, did you never got?
Thanks. First, I want to acknowledge the heartfelt concerns many landowners have, as well as the rather in-depth, I think, presentation that's been given on behalf of the marina. One of the concerns I have is our ordinance 15C under shoreline zoning. 3, the location shall not interfere with existing developed or natural beach areas. And so some information has been presented about needing a permit for a swim area, but I'm curious what exactly, under the state code, what is a swim area? I'm sort of thinking it's probably formalized with roped off areas and that sort of thing. Even without that, I'm not sure there's any authorization that would require the removal of the float. And so I looked at it as best I could, and I figured it's within about 50 or 60 feet from the end of the slips. And I have deep concerns about safety with, I know I've done some swimming in my day, and maybe you go out at night or maybe you don't, but you don't stay on either side of the float. So I'm real concerned about safety there. Additionally, I just have a few other items. Regarding parking, does the marina have some inkling of percent of parking in the past on really busy weekends like Memorial Weekend or July 4th? If you do, I'd love to hear that. Regarding pollution and that sort of thing, I understand, and I think it's quite impressive that there's so much oversight, and every quarter sort of things are looked at. But in terms of pollution and that kind of thing, and what the staff is doing, and staff's getting good training. But it's one thing to be trained, and it's one thing to have staff well supervised. So at a prior meeting, I think we learned that teenagers are hired. Well, there's good teenagers and there's ones that aren't so careful. So I would be concerned about supervision of things like gas fill-ups and also the sewage disposal from boats, because that can go badly really quickly. And I think at this point, that's all I have.
Well,
Good, Jason.
okay, I've got a boatload of things here.
Did you mean that?
Some of them mirror things that Mike said. Some of them are my own. First of all, I'm going to slap a wrist on both sides of the audience out here. There was an imputation made in this presentation here that Sebago Engineering might be trying to load the dice to get a favorable opinion for the owner by somehow using their connections with the town engineer and any professional associations on that side of the fence to kind of, you know, do something that might be less than professional. And I take exception to that. I am a construction professional. I've dealt with Sebago Technics in my business for a quarter century, and I have never found them to be anything other than engineering, professionally correct and above board in the way they do business. That said, I think that with the town engineer being an employee of Sebago, and if the marina folks must have known that this is going to be a contentious issue, to hire Sebago Technics in the first place might have been something that in hindsight wasn't the best decision given the contentious nature and the appearance of a possible impropriety. I also think that for Sebago to use a wildlife scientist on their own staff right down the hall to issue an opinion that's contained in their application about impact to wildlife in the area, might have been, in hindsight, better to use somebody outside the company to render that opinion. So I'm going to slap wrists on both sides on that. I was not aware until I looked at the second photograph in this, that the historical usage of Indian Point Beach swimming area was obviously at such cross purposes with where the literal line is of the marina's extension of the landside property line out into the water. I think that the Indian Point Beach folks have kind of shot themselves in a foot if there is a state requirement that you have a submitted and approved plan for a swimming area with the state, which must have, if you have that, it would also include, I think, the buoy lines shown on the water to show the definition of the area. You'd have a much stronger case to say, well, we have historical precedents here that may have a legal stance over the extension of the marina's literal property line into the water. I don't know what the legal answer is to that, if there's precedence that supports either case in case law. That's not mine to say, but it's obvious just from looking at this photograph that these two sides, the literal line and the historical Indian Point Beach swim area buoy line, aren't going to work together. Every community and every society on earth is run by some local interpretation of the golden rule, which is, I guess, could otherwise be stated as your right stop where the other fellow's nose begins. And I think that both sides seem to have lost that understanding a little bit here. I had my own idea before I came to the meeting tonight of, gee, what if the marina could create a buoy line that floated several feet above the water along their literal property line to create a channel whereby boats leaving the slip had to turn 90 degrees and head out into the middle of the lake in open water, and had to return to the slip to the slips in the same direction. And if Indian Point Beach could be constrained to redraw their buoy lines so that their buoy lines coincided with the literal property line of the marina, that maybe that would be a way of getting both sides into more common agreement. But according to what the engineer has submitted, you can't actually create a buoy line on top of the literal line, because that flies in the face of creating a structure within the 25-foot setback. So that idea that I had in my head probably is not workable. Looking at the overlap of the historical Indian Point Beach swimming area and the literal line and where these docks are, personally, I don't see any possible way, if there is no definition of a floating buoy line along the top of the literal line, to force boats to turn 90 degrees and go out into open water. I don't see any way on God's green earth that people aren't going to be doing 20, 30, 40, 50 miles an hour right across the face of the beach to get into their parking area on the slip. It just doesn't seem to me to be workable from a public safety point of view. As far as the traffic issue out on 302, the engineer has said that, hey, there's no problem. We have folks from the Indian Point Beach that say, yeah, there is. I think until a traffic study establishes where the overflow is, when it happens, where the people who park out on 302 that are creating the overflow, where do they go? Are they going to the state beach? Are they turning around and going down into the marina? Until we have that answer, all we have is statements from both sides that are at cross purposes without a professional way of ascertaining what the truth is. And I disagree, Rob, that a traffic study is not going to be of any use here. I think that's the only way we're going to come to any kind of a conclusion on that one. As far as pollution, Mike has already talked about that. The state-approved plan is great, the quarterly inspections are great, the annual review is great, the employee training is great. But if the employees aren't constantly monitoring the folks who use the slips out on the water and making sure that they are acting in confluence with the dictates of the safety program, the safety program isn't going to be worth a lot out on the end of the water out there. That's a concern of mine, and that's something that I think for the marina's own management, proper management of the situation, that they would want to be astute about that and have some kind of a plan to police the people out on the water and make sure that they're acting in concert with the state-approved plan that you're supposed to be abiding by. I understand, Rob, your statements about holding a ruler up or holding a popsicle up and saying that's how much that's going to impinge your view of the water. With all due respect, I think the photograph on page 3 of this presentation that shows the before and after view of what it's going to look like from the beach is a much more reality-based view of what's going to happen to the view from the beach. What that may be neither here nor there. If you have the right to develop it on your side of the littoral line, but again, the public safety of the boats zooming in and out straight out of their slips across the face of the beach, to me, just it does not seem to be a good situation. And it's quite clear that even if you have the right to build the marina on your side of the littoral line over there, that it is going to have a major impact on the view of the beach, and I think it's going to have a major impact on the public safety of the beach. I think that pretty much touches what I wanted to throw out there.
Oh, gosh, what do I say after that? I don't have a whole lot to say. I think the applicant has covered the bases as he's supposed to. I think he's pretty much within the frame of the rules that he has to follow. I do have a little concern about the existing beach and the boat traffic. It is tight quarters there, and there is an issue there. I don't know how we address that or if we even have that authority. I think that's about all I have to say.
Well, I stated earlier about my concern with the parking configuration, and that's really all that I have. I agree, though, that it's going to be detrimental to the people using the beach to see that, but I mean, I don't believe we have any reason to be able to address that.
Kevin?
Yeah, I had quite a few things, but they've mostly been addressed. But the traffic study is definitely a must in my mind too. That you can't. Every place is different, and to apply.
Traffic study or parking study?
Both. I mean, combined to see what's because that you get both of those together. To say California or something like that, that's just a totally different universe than what it. Even a different lake or pond in the state of Maine is a different universe. This is here, and we need to know what's happening on 302 and what the parking capabilities are, I think, before I could vote for it. They definitely met all the technical requirements, done a great job on that, other than the traffic in my mind. And one of the things I guess we can't address, which I think we should be able to, is the safety of having that many boats in such a small area, especially near a beach like that. I guess from a legal standpoint, is there anything that we can do about that, or?
About the swim area?
Well, the swim area, yeah, but
so-
it's concentrating so many boats in such a small area.
Well, I just, I was going to when you were finished, but since you asked, I did look up that section of the statute, just so you have some information. So this is Title 12, Section 1900. And a developed swim area is an area delineated by line buoys in accordance with the aids to navigation system. A qualified entity, and this is important, is a camping area, recreational camp, or governmental entity or governmentally sponsored group. And then it's saying a person may not establish or maintain a swim line or develop swim area without a permit. Then the only entities that can actually receive a permit for a swim area are the qualified entities. So you can only maintain and create a swim area if you are a camp or a governmental entity, and then you need to get a permit. But otherwise, under this, you can't even create or maintain a swim area.
I know you're looking at a statute, it might not address it in there, but a designated swim area doesn't, in my mind, preclude people from going out swimming.
Oh, yeah, I'm just telling you what
Right,
the,
no,
the-
I'm
I'm
just,
just
I'm
informing
sort
you what
of,
the
I'm sort of
statute said,
asking.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
along with that concept is the float. Is there any language in there that would preclude someone from putting a float out there? I don't believe there is, but I don't know.
Nope, there's nothing in, because this wouldn't apply to floats. There are other provisions that apply to permitting floats, just like getting a mooring permit or a float permit
Thanks.
and location of that.
Of course, the question I have there is even if you can put a float, do you have a right to put a float over a literal property line of an abutter? Because you're taking part of their usable water line based upon their literal line, so they haven't done themselves any favors by that.
I also had the same concerns over, with gassing, who's gonna monitor the gassing of the boats and the sewage disposal. In my mind, I think a good video surveillance system would help with that. Just even knowing that you're being monitored helps with that. So that, that might be something you want to consider.
Can I ask this question? Am I correct in that you guys would be precluded from building a float line along the top of your literal line to define a channel that boats leaving the slip had to turn 90 degrees? You simply cannot do that by the definition of a structure?
Correct. You cannot put a structure within that 25 feet on either side. It's so that you don't impede anybody's rights relative to access and whatnot.
That's unfortunate, because that would solve the problem.
Well, I will
Some-
do you mind if I add to that? Under the submerged lands program, you can go beyond the 25 feet if you have the consent of your neighbor.
And is a structure defined as something that's permanent or a structure that that can be
Well, it
taken
would be
up?
seasonal if they took it
Yeah.
down,
It's
and
just
put
a
it up
season-
and down every year. So,
Any impediment to
Any impediment.
navigation.
Okay.
So if it's a rope line, if it's a buoy, if it's a mooring, those are all considered structures and impediments to navigation. Relative to the comment relative to the swim areas in location and boats zooming in at 30 miles an hour, the boating regulations for the state of Maine define an area that's 200 feet from the shoreline. And that is called the water safety zone. And in the water safety zone, a craft is not supposed to be propelled quicker or faster than necessary just to navigate it forward. And once again, our thing is basically totally within the 200-foot water safety zone. So we shouldn't be seeing that occurring.
well, your point's well taken, but, the speed limit on the turnpike is thus and such, and everybody drives 15 miles or 20 miles over it, so I understand your point, but in the real world, people they'll be zooming in and out.
And also, I think we noted in our presentation or the resubmittal back that the swim area for the state swim area up near the boat launch area is 25 feet away, 40 feet away. And you have that similar situation there. So, you have to assume that people are coming in at a safe speed at that location, I would assume. I haven't heard of any issues occurring
I've seen how people drive on the lakes around.
relatively recently.
also had just a personal comment on the view not being obstructed, when you look out and you see something, just because you can see something beyond it doesn't mean that the view is not obstructed. Your eye immediately just seeing the big thing that's just sitting right in front of you. So I think you do more to hurt your case by saying the view is not obstructed. I mean, technically you can see a certain percent of something, but that doesn't mean your view is not obstructed.
It didn't say that the view was obstructed. I told you the view, the part of your view
I
you're
walked
seeing.
on the beach, and
And-
the second I walked out on that beach on that site walk, it was immediately, it's obstructed. There's just no question.
Once again, when you're looking at views from the standpoint of impacts, you're looking at something that doesn't belong in that atmosphere. Something
Well,
that's
that's
totally out-
that's your opinion. That's a complete,
and
you know, that's not objective, that's very subjective.
Okay.
I think we need a traffic study, that's my opinion. I can't see where this goes anywhere until we have resolution on that.
For parking. I mean, I can't see where, what are we talking about? 14 additional slips are gonna create traffic problems.
There's 49.
49 additional slips are gonna create a traffic problem.
Not necessarily a big traffic problem on 302, but I think parking.
Parking is the issue. And as far as.
Well, yeah, but if they're all pulling in at the same time, it creates a problem for Rio too.
And I think we also have to take into consideration the zone that we're in. I mean, you know, we talk about view, but we are in a commercial zone. And there is some expectations in a commercial zone that are just because you are in a commercial zone. And yes, we are also in the shoreline,
Right.
but we're not on, you know, Panther, where a large pier is going to be considered a little bit differently. I would anticipate them in our commercial zone district. So, and I think that's,
I think a
I get to
parking
the way.
study could be even as simple as a survey of marinas in the area, how many slips they have, how many parking spaces they have. And that would provide us with some useful information.
I thought they provided us with that.
Can I ask sort of a novel question? I have deep concerns about the beach area. Now, I understand the laws, but I've lived on a lake for many years in the summer, and people, it's getting much worse. People are speeding I mean, there's no respect for that 200-foot. There should be, but there isn't. There's not anywhere near enough game wardens to keep things in order. So I have deep concerns about the beach area, because I don't think there's any way we can regulate people not swimming there. And I see a huge conflict with boats. But I'm curious, can the whole, and maybe the answer is no, but looking at the view, it looked to me like perhaps the project could be moved over 40 feet. And if it were, I'd have a lot less concerns.
I don't think so. All right.
Am I allowed to ask a question?
Not really, but go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to ask, I mean, Indian Point was originally a campground.
Should go to the podium.
Are we?
Yeah. Oh.
You need to be at the podium. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just state your name
All right. Cindy Center, owner of a property on Indian Point, and also a client of Port Harbor. Indian Point was originally a campground. Are we grandfathered for that swimming area? I also have a young child. I'm very concerned about him swimming. And you can say all you want about how fast they're supposed to go.
Okay,
but
I
I'm
thought you were
all
gonna
on
ask a
this
question.
beach. Well, okay, my question is about grandfathering.
Okay. No,
That's my question.
Would there be I can't think of the legal term, but the easement that you gain by using something by using it outwardly so that people can see you using it over a period of years, there's a legal term. Would they have that in the
Not
beach?
over the public water. No.
Okay.
That's not their, it's no one's property.
Okay, so if I could summarize here, the board, we are, the board is, I guess, expressing some concern over if we are looking outward, I don't have my northwest here, but to the left side, those I mean, the only boats I think that we're thinking of are gonna be zooming in here. Rob, could you come to the podium for me? I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
So the boat slips that are the closest, that stick out towards the Indian Point area, I think those are the boats that we would be concerned with as far as the safety goes, as far as speeding in. Is that correct? Am I interpreting comments correctly? Okay. And we still have an issue with parking. Is that correct? Now, is the issue with accepting the .06 for the wet slips, or is the issue the .02 for the dry slips
You know, on the parking?
on the parking?
I think it's just, it's overall complete parking. I mean, it seems to me marinas get
There's no
slammed.
standard. So we're being asked to apply something for which there's no standard, for which there's no traffic engineering study to back up what has been proposed by the engineer that is standardless.
Right.
Right.
So, so are we talking about a summer study? Because we're not gonna get anything else. Is that what?
Can I make a
I think
comment?
that's what she
Let me
said.
go back to
Is
what
it
Ed
seasonal?
was talking about, in terms of looking at other marinas. I thought Rob had covered that to some degree.
Well, yeah, let's not solve it yet. Let's, is that, I just wanna get,
'Cause the owner has no records of overflow and people and the number of coming in and going. He said himself, I have no records of that. So how are you going to substantiate what the reality is if you don't have a study?
Which for me is why I inquired about really hugely busy weekends like July 4th. I would think you'd have some idea of what percent of parking was used up.
We've never had a problem.
Well, help me understand though, does that mean you had 20% left over, 50% left over?
well, Will, you can help us out?
We,
Alright,
All right, go ahead.
so your standards, Article 9, minimum standards, C, off-street parking. So, it, item I says, for any structure or use not specifically enumerated above, the reviewing authority shall determine the number of off-street parking spaces required to accommodate customers, patrons, and employees based on a parking analysis submitted by the applicant. So, obviously the question becomes, what is a parking analysis? So, what they've submitted could be considered a parking analysis, I guess. It doesn't say parking study. I think there's,
Well,
what does that terminology mean?
so I think what this is saying is, so this follows where you have, if you have an institution, it's one space for each 4 beds, it's the standards,
Right.
but you can't come up with a number for everything. So there is this catch-all where this board has the ability to determine the number of required spaces for this particular use pursuant to an analysis. If you are presented an analysis which does not allow you to come up with a number because you don't feel like you have enough information, you have the ability to ask for that analysis that's been provided to be substantial and to provide some more information so you can make the decision you're supposed to make under the standard.
Okay, thank you. So, you're up on your part. Yes.
I thought that Rob had given us some information regarding what other marinas had experienced in terms of parking and automobile circulation and that sort of thing.
if ITE had more studies, that we would get a better confidence level. They only have one study. Those studies that they typically have in these manuals are all over the country. They're not just from Maine. They're not just from New England. So they look at every area geographical in the country. That is what we have done. We have looked at the best information available relative to what parking is required. And we tried to be conservative about it and say, okay, we're going to assume that we're not going to park as many vehicles here as we could. Once again, by TEP rules, we could go in there and pave that, and it would be no different than the gravel that is there now. It's impervious now, it'd be impervious in the future. And then we could stripe off 9-foot parking spaces, which would give us a boatload more, excuse the phrase. But we believe that we've been conservative in using the guidance that we could find relative to marinas, and we have relied upon our clients' knowledge. They maintain 5 marinas around the state. Once again, they're not going to want to shortchange their customers on parking. They're not going to want to deal with code enforcement with people parking out on the roadway. And if there's a problem in the end, they're going to create more parking. We did what we thought was appropriate. We used guidance from recognized sources relative to that parking. And to go, to go count parking spaces at a marina right now, how do I know if they have enough parking spaces? They may not have enough. They may have too many. So we try to use reliable basis to come up with the parking and be conservative on it.
Okay.
I mean, for me, I think your point's well taken. For me, the only sensible parking study for me would be if someone could go around to similar marinas on settings on Sebago and Long Lake that have marinas and parking on July 4th. Well, that's not possible. So your point hits home to me that if we do a study, how do we know they have enough? How do we know they don't have too many?
Yeah. Just, we didn't give you all the information that we dug through. A lot of this was based upon around that critical time frame, whereas what's going to be your worst weekend? Up here, it's July 4th. Not Memorial Day, not Labor Day, it's July 4th. And that's what these numbers represent relative to the required parking. That's typically what ITE is doing too. When they're looking at it, they don't give an average for a shopping mall. They give, hey, what's going to happen at Christmas time? And that's what we believe we used for this project, to come up with a reasonable amount of parking for the project. And once again, we can go count spaces at other marinas, but it doesn't mean, one, do
I think
they?
we got that point, Rob.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Can I just, one thing to just think about?
Yep.
Sometimes when this type of subject comes up where you don't really have good information to create a standard, but you think it's good information, you could have a monitoring condition for them to monitor.
Going forward?
Yeah.
I mean, after?
Yeah.
Oh,
And that might work here where they have perhaps room for additional parking spots if really needed.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
mm-hmm.
We'd be more than welcoming of a condition that the project is monitored after construction, and that if there is a deficiency in parking, that we create more parking.
Okay. All right, so how about we look at the, I guess, Mike, to start with your concern, of the slips. I think, as Bruce pointed out, the Indian Point Beach roping off of the swim area, right, impedes upon where the slips are gonna be, right? It crosses over the line, right? So, I mean, if we were to take, if that shifts, right, if that whole beach shift switches, we're only talking about those outboard for boats that have the possibility of going swimming, going speeding by, because there's gonna be ropes there. Boats and ropes don't go well.
I'm sorry, say again?
Well, if we take a look at this picture,
Yep.
right? And this, the yellow line here being a roped-off beach area, roped-off swim area. right? That's obviously going to have to shift. right? It's going to have to move this way because it's not, it crosses over their line as it is now. Right, so I mean, it goes,
Well, that's, I mean, that's if in fact it's freshly roped off. I mean,
well, okay, but it would have to be roped off.
who's gonna,
Well, it's their beach area.
That's what they
I
do
know,
now.
but-
That's what they do now is they rope it off.
but what if they don't?
Well, what if they don't?
Yeah, I mean, who's gonna enforce that?
That they rope off their beach area?
Yeah.
Well, I think they would want to rope, I mean, they would do it now, why would they not want to do it
Well-
in the future?
And that's probably true.
And especially if there's a marina next door.
So I think I see your point, is that if that area is roped off, then hopefully,
The boats are not going to go through a roped off area.
well, they're not gonna go through it if they see it, and they should see it during daytime.
Sure.
So I think it would be the unusual situation, maybe at night, and I think that goes beyond reasonable care.
Right. So, but it would be really nice if we could get some sort of markers in along that line. Out. So, Rob, if you were to come up, and if you were on your yellow, on your green line there, yeah, way at the end, I mean, we can, you're not putting in the structure, but you can put in a buoy or two that would, you know,
Channel marker, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That in the directions are that the boats have to come in on the other side.
We can petition the state to put in channel markers anywhere.
Yeah, or we could put in, correct, we could do that.
Yeah, that's one exception. Yeah, we can do that.
Okay,
Can you put in multiple channel markers?
yeah, down the line.
We can contact the state and they'll allow that, yeah.
And of course, we can instruct the boat owners that that's what that's for.
Yep.
Yeah. And most boat owners will stay inside the channel.
The channel markers have a color, which
Right.
means you gotta be on one side or the other.
And if you like your propeller, you're gonna be on the right side. Okay.
Yeah, we can do that.
All right, so we can do that. So that should take care of the concern on the speeding boats,
I think so, yeah.
right? Is that, okay. All right. Can I get the board's just general feeling on the other areas that have been addressed a couple of times here now? Let's hold off on section 16A, but on the Article 10, Section E, which is the land use ordinances. Is there concerns in any, went through here? Let me just run through them and you just yell at me if there is. Preservation of landscape, purpose of building to the environment, vehicular access, parking and circulation. There's going to be surface water drainage, utilities, special features, exterior lighting, emergency vehicle access, landscaping, or site plan review. Besides the parking, are we fairly comfortable with that information that's been presented? Yes. How about you guys down there? Okay, so it's parking still. Let's hold off on parking. If we go to Section 15 for the shoreline zoning land use ordinance, we run through those. Lot standards and setbacks, right, principal or accessory structures are not applicable. The piers, docks, and wharfs, The campground's not applicable, campsite's not applicable, commercial, industrial use is not applicable, parking area is once again up. Roads and driveways, signs, stormwater runoff, septic waste disposal, essential services, mineral exploration, agriculture, timber harvesting. I think that's it. Right? Are we, besides parking, are we comfortable with what the applicant has presented for each of those areas?
Yes.
Yes, okay. If we go one more then to, what did I do with that? Section 16D for shoreland zoning. Do we still have, will maintain safe and healthy conditions? Are we okay with, if we put in buoys for the safety of the pier? Does that become okay? All right. Not result in water pollution, erosion of cemetery to surface waters. Will adequately provide for disposal of wastewater. Will not have an adverse impact on spawning grounds, fish, aquatic life. Will conserve shore cover and visual as well as actual points of access to inland waters. Will protect archaeological and historic resources. Will not adversely affect the existing commercial fishing or maritime activities. Will avoid problems associated with the floodplain development and is in conformance with the provisions of Section 15, which we looked at. Are we okay with those?
Yes.
I don't think I am in total, so.
Which you are not with safe and helpful conditions?
The wildlife habitat, I'm concerned if there's any nesting loons in, around the beach area.
Okay.
And then regarding number 5, will conserve shore cover and visual as well as actual points of access. I'm not sure the visual in there is really referring to normally what we think of as view, but I guess I'd like some clarification. Mary, what do you think? I mean, the language there seems to be talking specifically about points of access to inland waters, i.e. like inlets and that sort of thing. But do you think that the visual really is broader and referring to views in general?
So generally, these types of standards and the standards that DEP applies are talking about public viewpoints. So if you have a place where the public will go to view the inland water, then that is something that should be preserved. It generally doesn't apply to every private property owner's own view. It's generally if you have a public point of view and being preserved for the public.
For the public, how about a large condominium?
Still, that's private land.
Gotcha. Okay. Then I'm okay with number 5, but wondering about loons. I know they're very challenged in the state, so I'm just wondering if there's any evidence of loon nesting in around the area that would be impacted by the new development.
Okay.
Once again, the project has been vetted by the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, and that's one of the specific things that they look at, whether there are specific nesting areas, and if you go to their website, they have certain areas shown where there might be deer wintering areas or inland shore bird areas, wading habitats, inland waterfowl locations, and they look at all of that as part of their review, and nothing came back on that.
Thanks.
Okay. So we are down to the left with the parking. Is that, because everything else, according, everything else that we have as far as the ordinances go, the project meets?
Yes.
Yes.
Concur? Okay. So now it's the parking. Yes. Right. That's all right. Yep. Okay. And there's another one that, Will has it, we have to put, the verbiage in the back at Sunset Clause. I think he's got it on there.
Standard note,
Yeah.
so that's not on the drawings.
I don't know if Rob did or not. Rob, did you already put a note on there about the sunset clause on the, on your drawings?
I believe we did.
Okay, it's on there. All right. So the monitor of the parking, to monitor parking, if it becomes an issue, what happens, Barry? If it becomes an issue, we find more sites, more parking?
They would create more,
Well,
they offer to create more.
they have to be able to, I think they come back to you with the results of their monitoring. And if it turns out there are not enough parking spaces for the use, they either need to be able to demonstrate that they can create more parking under the ordinance, or they need to eliminate some slips.
Or they need to eliminate slips. And who?
Typically that, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, Mary, but typically that's you would specify that that's for a season or a year?
Yeah, you'll have to,
or-
right, I mean, specify the monitoring period and specify what will happen if, in the event that, then this.
Okay.
And so what would trigger that? I mean, would some sort of complaint or observation from a citizen be enough to trigger that?
No, they're going to, you would ask them for, one suggestion I would have, so you don't have to do it right now, is that you could have them draft a monitoring plan
Right. Okay.
and then bring it back to you. And that monitoring plan will have what they propose they're going to do this summer, or this summer and next summer, if you want 2 summers, depending on the length. And then you can review the plan, and the plan then will be attached to the approval.
Okay. Yes, Rob?
We will propose to monitor every weekend and holiday. Those are going to be the times that you're going to see the greatest parking. And we will record those numbers and report those to the town on a monthly basis.
During season, during the season, okay.
Starting in May and ending in November. Because November, after November.
Okay, so the last thing is we have not, well, we have in the past, but we have not recently, the last year or so, gave final approval until after the DEP has, permit has been issued. So I don't see any reason for changing that. Unless, I don't want to speak for the board, but just to see what they are going to come back and say.
Okay.
And along with what Mary said, I think that probably getting that formal monitoring, what you intend to do,
Yep.
put in writing, will take time anyway.
Yep.
So that's,
And we'll also address the channel.
and address the channel markers. What else we need? Yeah, that's it. Is that acceptable to everybody? So we will, I guess formally, we'll move the project back to the table, and we'll, if we're still meeting in public meetings come April, we will, and DEP
We'll be here.
We'll be here. So do I have a motion to put the, put Harbor Marine project back onto the table?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion, just before we vote, you're okay with what what the board is expecting?
The 3 items that we just discussed.
Okay, all right, yep, all those in favor? Anyone opposed? Motion passes, what's the problem? What did we not do, Bruce? Are you just being ornery today, or is there something that you?
He's taking my place.
I just don't think it's a workable project from a public safety or parking issue standpoint.
Oh, you should, okay. All right. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you,
for your
Will.
time.
Thanks, Rob.
So do I understand the second weekend, second Wednesday of April? No more public.
Yeah, I don't have the schedule. Equally.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have to open it up yet. You just gotta get those things in and you're done.
Already.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's gonna stay. Thanks, Will. Pick an easy one next time, would you?
All right, thanks, Will. Thank you again, Mary.
Cold in there? No. Sorry? No. We're kind of, yeah. Change of seats.
Trip to the board from.
I think that's probably where Kevin is.
Well, put you here, I'll bring your name tag.
Thank you for your call back today. Thank you for your help. Go get him, Tiger.
I apologize for missing the signed ordinance in your packages. I've been printing it out back there for this meeting.
So Bob, I don't know how you want to do this, but seeing that there doesn't appear to be any public forthcoming, you can do this in one lump, or we can kind of go through it. For the public portion, you can go in one lump, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, oh yeah, we're not sticking around.
It's kind of what I was getting at.
It's right here.
That was enough for one night.
We can do the fireworks separate, it's like a vote against. Okay?
You want to do them separate? You want to vote
No,
again?
just the one.
Just the one?
Or, well, I don't know, we've got a couple, you do have a couple new ones. You've had information on the sign and the business.
The business we just got, but that's not really, I mean, that's not us. And
You're just in the motion.
we're just, right. And Mary's going to dig out the sign right now. By the time we get there,
There was a little input from the attorney on the business license.
from the attorney?
Let's see, just one aspect, still need to discuss the definition of a business. I don't know if we really have that in there. Raymond does already have some specific business license ordinance. He's thinking of putting it together into one, all of them into a business license ordinance. And what else did he say?
Yeah.
One option would be to combine them into a single business license ordinance, if there would be one unified application and approval process, but each specific type of business would have their own performance standards. It's a possibility. We just wanted to know.
Can we just see how this goes first?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And start getting into every performance standard for every business could be.
All right, so for the record, I'm going to open the public hearing for the potential ordinance revisions for the 2020 town meeting. And we'll close the the public hearing, as no one is present. So our, tonight, we will go through, we don't need to go through in detail, we've seen them all, but we do have to vote on each of them. We can, our vote is to send them to the selectmen recommending approval, or just to send them to the selectmen. Obviously, we turn them down. I think they just stay here, right? I don't know. I'm always
No,
confused how
they-
that goes. They go any way, right? They still go.
They would go without your
Without
recommendation.
a recommendation. Well, wait a minute, but we can recommend,
You can recommend a positive, or you can recommend a negative.
oh, okay, all right. that's
Either
how it
way,
works.
they're
Either
going.
way, either way they go.
They're going. Just, most likely, they're gonna look for your positive.
Yeah, right. All right, so Mary has got this packet for us, and she's got them in order. We've been through them a couple times. Not to drag this out, but I'll just kind of go through this. And the first one is the shoreland zoning, section 16. It's it's no real change. It's a clarification, basically an administrative change. If I'm wrong anywhere along the lines, Jim, jump in and tell me I'm wrong. So I would move that we approve and send to the Board of Selectmen recommending approval. There's a second. Any discussion from the board? All those in favor? All right, this one goes. The second one is the fines for land use ordinance. This is, again, real no change. It's just making consistency of language within the ordinances. I recommend that we send this to the selectmen recommending approval.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? That's approved and sent. The third one is the appeals for the land use ordinance. All this does is change the meeting times for our zoning board of appeals. It doesn't really do anything else. I recommend that we send this to the Board of Selectmen recommending approval.
Second.
All those in favor? Pass. Our third one is the land use ordinance, Article 12. The only thing this does is add definitions to the ordinance. It does not make any significant changes. I would recommend that we send this to the Board of Selectmen recommending approval. Is there a second? All in favor? It goes. Our next one is land use ordinance, Article 4. Clarify density for duplex and multifamily lot density, and adding timber harvesting for an allowed use. I don't think that there's anything other than that. It's in there. I recommend that we send this to the Board of Selectmen recommending approval. And is there?
Discussion?
There is discussion, yes.
Yes. It's actually not a permit, it's called a forest operations notice. I don't know, should we change that now, or?
We should.
Well, I think under our performance standards, it's considered timber harvesting.
Is it?
So if we're gonna do that, we gotta go wholesale and change everything.
It's probably okay. The other thing is, it's actually the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry.
We can definitely do that.
That's easy to change.
That's easy enough to
No,
change.
just do that then. The permit thing is fine.
Agricultural, conservation, and forestry.
Yes.
This one's taking long, this is short, this is gonna be collated all, so why don't I give you the cover pages?
Okay. So I recommend that we send the land use ordinance Article 4 changes to the Board of Selectmen recommending approval.
Second.
All those in favor? Approved.
There is one item on this next one that I just kind of briefly want to add.
Okay, we're on to the miscellaneous, I don't
Fire.
think we're gonna, yeah.
The fire
Miscellaneous ordinance, fire department?
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
The one is the article includes Article 8 and 9. 9 is the portion that deals with the sprinkler requirement if they go over the threshold with an addition. Yep. And it's based on the amount of improvements, right? Similar to what you do in the shoreline zoning almost, with replacement structure.
Okay.
Which one are you on?
We are on the fire ordinance. Fire protection ordinance.
Okay.
It's 9 on our list.
Article 4.
You okay? Is there, I move that we send this to the Board of Selectmen recommending approval.
Second.
And is there a vote? Anyone in favor? And you're opposed. All right.
I didn't want Bruce to be alone and oppose this.
Darn nice of you. Next is the land use ordinance article 13 for open space subdivisions. This is kind of what we've been referring to as the loop road. It gives a path, path for the town.
Kinda call it road connectivity.
Road connectivity.
Yeah.
So it's a road connectivity. It gives a path for the developer to interconnect projects, pave the roads, and have the road connected by, and have the option of the town accepting the road. At the selectmen's.
Right, I mean, ultimately, it's the selectmen's choice,
Selectmen's
but
choice.
the board would be in favor.
Is there a second? Oh, I didn't say anything. Recommend that we send this to the Board of Selectmen.
Second.
Recommending approval. There's a second. Any discussion? I think this is the only one that really is out of the, just kind of, all those in favor? The peddler's ordinance, miscellaneous ordinances, 8. Just add the mobile vendor definition, I think, and revise the process for timeline for the license. I think this has, is there any discussion further? I recommend that we send this to the Board of Selectmen recommending approval.
Second.
And all those in favor? Done.
If I may interrupt, there's one point I'd like to say on the peddlers, it's possessive. And I don't think peddler ordinance should be possessive. It says peddler apostrophe S, or maybe peddler,
Oh, peddler, that's plural, you're right.
I don't know.
either plural or it's
Yeah.
singular, but it's not possessive.
Good eye there.
It's,
Right.
it should be apostrophe S.
Right from left
It is
field.
apostrophe S, but that says it's possessive.
Oh, I just followed what was there.
Owns it.
I just,
No, you're right, Mary, it should be peddler,
Yeah.
right? Yes.
okay.
Okay, you can go back to work now, Mary.
Thank you.
She's been working all along, including her comments.
Oh, we did this one though, didn't we? Did we just send this? Who's keeping notes?
Yep.
We did, okay.
Yeah.
Next one, subdivision regulation, Article 1, to add compliance with net density area. I don't think this does anything but admin change.
Yep.
Right,
Another
right?
change, Yep.
I recommend we send this to the Board of Selectmen recommending approval.
Second.
All those in favor? Done. Next is the business license ordinance. This did not come generated from us. It came generated from the town. We really did not work on this at all, but all of this did come from the town attorney, right?
Correct.
So I guess I move that we send this to the Board of Selectmen recommending approval.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? 2.
Well, I
3.
I really want to be able to read it first.
Do we need to have discussion? We didn't have discussion.
We didn't have discussion. Yeah, we want,
Maybe that would help
okay.
clarify.
Yeah, can we, yeah. So, a little discussion, maybe I'll vote positive.
You're on a roll, Paul. That's too bad you got.
Yeah, I know. Jeez, you guys just slow me up like. You were worried. You just wanted to give Mary more time. That's the only thing.
So, in going through this today, because I just received it today as well, I think currently business licenses, they go through you?
Yeah.
They go through Scott, which may or may not be the best situation, because it puts him in a terrible spot. I mean, ultimately, he can defer it to the Board of Selectmen now.
Yeah, well, that was one of the things that they would like to do, is that the Board of Selectmen would actually do the original business license, and then the renewal would go through the town clerk and go through the process of code enforcement and fire protection, that they all meet everything.
And those are renewed on an annual basis.
Yeah.
And I think it also gives you some latitude as to why you can deny a license based on performance.
Yeah.
So, how much is the fee?
That has to be determined by the Board of Selectmen. You have no say in that. Unfortunately, you have no say about any fees. So, yeah, it ultimately comes down to them to assess what the fee would be. And again, to Bob's point, this really, you're going through the motions on this one. This is really the Board of Selectmen's,
Right, why are we even?
because it's just the process of the ordinances.
Okay.
All ordinances have to,
Have to go through
have
the
to be,
planning
board.
go through the Board of, Planning Board first. You know, it's kinda like a couple years ago, we had the cemetery one, not really in our wheelhouse, but, you know.
So the way it is now in the Scott, do you have any enforcement?
Not now, the change, well, it would, well, really, there isn't much, I could enforce it, yes. This gives it more gives it a definition, a little better process as to why it could be turned down, or why it could be revoked. A lot of these, some of these, as far as not paying personal property taxes, now we would be able to, if they serve alcohol, you could go after the, tell them that they, tell the state they would not give them their state license unless they paid the personal property tax. It just kinda gives us a little more leverage on that.
So even if a business is not required to have a license with the state, just because they live in Raymond, they're required to have a license to earn a living here in Raymond.
Well, yes,
Basically.
make sure then to be inspected every year that it's that it is secure, that it is done, it is code compliant with electrical and fire, mostly it's fire protection, as to make sure their exits are always blocked, make sure they're properly wired, we don't have extension cords running around in drop ceilings. Really isn't too much code-wise, but it's more for life safety.
So any business at all. I mean,
Well, the one thing we wanted exempt.
I've been in business for over 25 years
Yeah.
here.
Home occupation would be exempt. So if you're running a small business out of your home, they don't claim personal property taxes are usually involved in any of that or licensed by the state. They would not be, they would still go through me for the license. They would not go through the select board for the license.
So I'm not really required to have one.
If you're running a business out of your home and you got a home occupation permit, you're good.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Good answer.
You gonna send the sheriff to come get me or what?
I mean, it's, some of these people do not have a license for food or whatever, and they are a small business. It's not something, it's something that can be done. One of the things other towns do, they'll basically go to small claims court for that, if they have to. But most of the time, just having that ability to do that is enough to deter anybody from not claiming the personal property tax, which is one of the issues that they're dealing with. The other one is that Wayne and I have run through it when other businesses have gone in. There's been quite a delinquent upkeep of life safety, and doing a yearly review would help that.
Well, I can speak from an assessing standpoint, the personal property thing would be a huge help. I mean, because if they don't pay personal property, they can not be licensed, and they're gonna know that. I think that's really important for the town, helpful.
Where's the exemption? There's nothing in here that
Well,
says it.
we'll have to throw that one in there. We didn't, it's kind of like I said, this has been kind of,
Those are the worst way to pass ordinances.
yeah. It would be something that we would have to throw in there, yes, you are correct, that they would be exempt. Home occupations would be.
Do we need to do that before we send it to do we need to do that before we okay it?
You can add it in as a
Condition of approval.
condition that you'd like to see added as part of your recommendation.
Definitely, so everybody that telecommutes would be falling under that pretty much, I would think, because that's a home office if you're telecommuting.
Yeah, that's true, that's
So
true.
we gotta definitely put
Mm-hmm.
something in there. Exempt those people.
All right.
So do you want to amend your vote?
We haven't voted on it yet. Oh, well, yeah, we actually did, didn't we? Before too.
So you might want to
We-
rescind that
Well,
vote.
no, we probably didn't. We didn't follow parliamentary procedure.
That's right, we
with,
did. I was,
So technically, I don't think we did, right?
I would
We
agree with you.
didn't ask for,
But you-
Questions.
but-
That's right.
but-
There
But
you
you
go,
have,
yeah.
if you want the friendly amendment, you need to add that
Yes.
into the motion.
All right, so we'll, this is my motion. So we will add, I will accept the friendly amendment to add language for exceptions
For home.
For home office?
Yeah.
For home offices?
Home business.
For home business.
Home office.
Home office, home business. Yes, whoever seconded? Might have been you? Doesn't matter.
Second.
Well, second.
For me.
Any more discussion as to this? So
So we're voting on the amendment.
we're voting on the friendly amendment to change, to
add,
add
yes.
exceptions for home office. All those in favor? All right, so we're doing this.
Well, back on.
Go.
And now we gotta vote on the whole thing, right?
Yes.
Oh, no, you got street ordinance still.
No, we just did. We voted on the friendly amendment. And next is street ordinance. Jim, I'm just gonna ask
So
you
we
to
didn't
run through
vote on
this
the
because
whole
I'm not
thing.
sure I
Yeah,
am.
we've got a couple things in here. We've got two.
Don't we have to re-vote on the whole ordinance now that we've added the amendment?
We just did. We voted on adding the friendly amendment to the ordinance.
And that
That
suffices for
suffices.
approving the amendment?
Correct. Did you wanna vote no?
Yes, but that's, it's okay. Forget it.
Okay,
Just-
under the street, we got two pieces of this.
I'm in the
One
minority,
was
yeah.
revising, one is kind of dealing with some of the standards for pavement thicknesses, street design criteria. That also included dead-end streets and language for extension of right-of-ways to abutting properties in subdivisions. The other piece of this deals more with kind of the construction standpoint of it, standards for how we utilize LiDAR, satellite, or aerial imagery survey, because we've had some issues with that, making sure it's field tested to be measurable against field surveys, and that we have benchmarks on plans, and that we require within street plans that 3 of the coordinates are tied to main state grid, so we can use it for GIS. That's essentially the bulk of that one. And we did a little widening of, we did a little widening of some shoulders on that one too.
And did we change some of the construction standards? Isn't that what we did?
Yeah, that was what I meant, the street standards.
Oh, okay.
The
All right.
pavement
Pavement.
thicknesses and gravel shoulders.
So I move that we send the street ordinance changes to the Board of Selectmen recommending approval.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Done.
Signs was actually, I don't know if you have a copy of it, but
There
it
is
actually
just-
came down to a fairly simple process, actually. What got us into the question about freedom of speech had to deal with, we had a section in there that dealt with political signs.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, the recommendation is to strike that right out of the ordinance. And then it shows up in a couple different places. Bulletin boards too, we just struck that because anything you get into where you start to be opinionated about the type of speech can get you into difficulties. We did put in there, a piece in there, as long as you talk about how the message is presented, the board or the electronic or the digital, so we did put a small piece in there about that. Other than that, that is all we did in that section. So we really only struck out 2, and we just made note that our jurisdiction includes electronic or digital boards as well.
All right, I move that we send the land use ordinance Article 9, minimum standards for signs, to the Board of Selectmen recommending approval.
Second.
Or any discussion?
The political signs,
Eliminated.
Eliminated.
we got rid of, so in other words, there's no ordinance in there now.
You can't differentiate between,
Yeah, it's basically under the term temporary signs.
yep, falls under temporary signs. So there are term limits of how long they can keep them out there and the size that we just can't dictate the message on the board.
Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Done. Done.
So we'll bundle those up.
Jim, Scott, and Wayne, thank you very much for putting all these, doing this, getting this all together for us this quickly. And there was a little rush there.
Yeah, well, it happens. It's that time of year, it's like taxes.
Yeah, but it happened about the same time. But thank you, appreciate getting it all through.
We'll clean it up and send that off to the Board of Selectmen. That'll go, what, April? To them?
Yep.
As far as plan of communication, the only thing I have is we do have a sketch plan for next month. Obviously, you'll have the return, it sounds like, of the one before this. We have a sketch plan for,
Residential lot division?
yes, which was part of a subdivision off, is that Whitney or Presidential?
Whitney.
Whitney, which was a consent order by the town. If they further divided any other lots, it had to come back to the planning board. There is one lot on the end, which was the one that everybody figured at some point it would come back. It's coming back. So they gotta do a little tiny configuration to the end of the street, but it's an amendment to the subdivision, so it has to come back to you.
Are we anticipating a problem?
I haven't seen it yet.
Okay.
We just got the packet in, so I haven't really had a chance to look at it. They're just coming in for sketch plan at this point, so I don't think that they've done everything. I think they just kind of want to get a feel from the board what they're going to be looking for.
Okay.
And what's that? That's the only sketch plan. Yep. That's just one additional lot, so it should be pretty simple. Don't know what we'll get into with the rest of the subdivision, but it should be fairly simple.
I don't think that one that we talked about, he's gonna do anything of that anytime
No.
soon.
And the other one that sounds like it may be coming in the future is Aroma Joe's.
Oh, back again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that have to come to the board, or is that?
Yeah, it's only been to the board for a sketch plan.
Yeah.
But didn't we
No.
give Scott the authority to?
Oh, the building, we did something on it because the building and
Oh,
everything
that's
was
right.
so small.
You did. So that's gonna be back to us as staff review. You're correct.
It's the only thing we, yeah. our
Yeah,
only
it'll come
concern
back
was
to us
the-
as staff review unless something blows out. I think we were waiting to see back the traffic, but.
Yep.
So, traffic, right? So, that's all I've got.
Okay. Mary's doing the.
Mary's just giving you a
signs.
final copy of that sign ordinance.
And just for info, the board, I'm supposed to be leaving for Florida on Saturday. I'm not sure I'm going, but probably not, but I may not be here for the next meeting, so.
Bring your
Ed,
hand sanitizer.
yeah, Ed will run it if I am.
Chances of getting the
Not
flu
here.
are a lot worse than the coronavirus.
I don't know, there's some
I don't
scary
know,
stuff.
It's,
It's ramped up a lot faster.
Yeah.
yeah, they're
that
shutting
age
down
group.
schools and colleges and everything else
Yeah,
now,
I
so.
don't know, I think
I was scheduled to go to South Carolina
It's gonna
too,
be-
but that's
it's gonna
not
be
happening.
Yeah, I don't think,
devastating.
I don't think I'm going either, but. All right. Well, thanks for everybody's
Motion
input
adjourned.
tonight. Motion is adjourned. Second? All those in favor?
Yep.
Done.